Welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere, where CEOs, leaders, and experts at building teams,
companies,
organizations,
and amazing cultures share how to lead from anywhere in the world. I'm your co-host on the East Coast, Ginny Bianco Mathis.
And I'm your co-host on the West Coast, Mitch Simon. And we invite you to join us to Team Anywhere. Today on the podcast, we're delighted to have Kim Clark Pakstys, board member, interim CXO, and expert on mergers and acquisitions. M&As have been on fire for over a year now during this pandemic. Kim shares with us her experience with successful leaders who've been managing difficult mergers through patience, resiliency, and empathy. You'll learn how clarifying decision-making, specifying roles, developing systems, but most of all, getting all people on the same page is crucial, not only for newly merged companies, but also vital to teams anywhere.
Welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere. I'm your co-host, Dr. Virginia Bianco Mathis on the East Coast, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Mitch Simon, on the West Coast. And today we have a very distinguished guest, Kim Clark Pakstys, and she is going to be talking to us about her area of expertise, mergers and acquisitions. And she also is on the board and governance chairman for the Easter Seals in the Greater Washington, D.C. area. And she was managing director at BDO and managing partner for Strategic Organization Solutions. And she often is guest speaker, panel moderator. Hello, Kim. Welcome.
Hey, Jenny. Thank you so much. I really am glad to be with you and Mitch today to talk about M&A and this hybrid world. It's exciting times.
Fabulous. Thanks so much. So to start off, let's get a little personal. How has this affected you? What have you learned? How are you operating the same or differently given this whole experience that we all have tried to navigate?
And I think it's probably ebbed and flowed every 3 months from the time we were sent home until today as we're slowly emerging. And I'll say there's been different lessons in each era of that. I was actually just communicating with someone who I had shared the last night before lockdown, judging a cocktail contest for a for a consulting company. It was a very important stuff. But then just reflecting on how different, things are. We would never do that again today where you're doing mixology. So I think my big takeaways are, patience. I think patience has always been a leadership quality that one maybe I've struggled with, and I've learned the importance of it, and not only just from my own personal perspective, but how pace and how you come to things and the ability to reflection is really important in all the work that we do personally and professionally. I think that another one I'll say is resilience. I've always kind of thought, because I have moved around a lot, done a lot of many different things, personally and professionally as well, that it kind of meant just keep moving and keep pushing. And I think it's really more about, to be able to keep moving and pushing and progressing, you have to have that time for rest to be able to build in. And sometimes always going forward isn't as successful. So resilience, I have a new definition for. And empathy, really the idea that every time you walk into a room these days, and especially in a hybrid world, you have no idea, who and what the scenario is of the other people that you're engaging with. And that was true in the before times. And in some ways, I think we might think we know more because we're looking in people's living rooms, but we really don't know what's gone on just that 5 minutes before. And I think it's so important in everything that we do from a leadership perspective. And so those are my takeaways.
Wow, those are great. Yeah, patience. Everything you said, the patience has been a big one for me. The empathy, for sure. We don't even have anymore the walking down the hallway prep, right? We're just on. So,
right.
Thanks for sharing that. So how has this affected your world of mergers and acquisitions? What has happened in the last, year and a half with that very strategic uh, task that folks may or may not
Yeah.
have been accomplishing?
So, so I think it has been varied in different markets. It's been varied for different size organizations. It's been varied whether you are a strategic or you are in private equity. The transaction component of the business, pretty much went on a quick stop and then figured out, okay, well, we can do this, but differently, and continued pretty. In certain businesses, it got hot and heavy, and there were more acquisitions in certain markets last year than there had been, in prior market years, and that was coming off very, 2 years of significant numbers of acquisitions, both in deal size and in deal numbers. And for the strategics, I think they thought a little bit differently about it in terms of how can we really think about what we want to build to expand our portfolio and be smart about it, and what is this going to do from a strategic implication for the integration. And people actually were putting, during that pause time, while they may not have stopped all of the transactional getting ready activity with the lawyers and the bankers, et cetera, they were using some of the pause that they were trying to figure out what they were going to do to be very intentional around, is this an asset buy? Is this a strategic piece that's going to be something that's going to add value to the market? Are we buying customers? Are we buying particular capabilities? And each one of those require a different integration strategy, different timeline, a different approach, and it allowed people to be some more thoughtful, where historically many times it was a one-size-fit-all type of approach. People were thinking about it because the world was changed, even though some of the things might not have really changed in terms, but it gave us a great opportunity to bring leadership, theories into the conversation.
Wonderful. And yes, just as you said, then the reflection was also then being quote unquote imposed on what kind of strategic decision is this? Whereas before, they just jump in.
Right. And I think the other thing was, from a hybrid perspective, when people said, okay, we're going to continue doing business, big things that, were part of due diligence already around, data privacy and security and information sharing became even a bigger challenge, trying to have clean data rooms for people to work remotely to be able to go through those processes. So getting the right tools, the right security, the right systems in place to be able to do that across multiple platforms.
So were there discussions about, all right, let's acquire this company, or let's merge with this one over here? Were there discussions about, oh, wait a minute, our culture is we want everyone to be back in their seats in September, but your culture is they're already all working out in space, right? How did that come up, if at all?
So I think those are probably tertiary conversations, and I think it's something that's really important as people start to think about, what are those different levels of conversation around culture, right? Because culture is how people behave, and it's something that I would say, quite honestly, a year ago would not have been part of the conversation, and certainly in early scenarios that that was a real estate conversation. It wasn't about a culture. It was a cost of doing business conversation. It was a risk management.
Yes.
It was a where are we in the market? How are we serving our customers? Those are all important things. But now, as you look at, are we coming back as one culture, which comes back to, are we one brand, one set of people doing all things together? Or are we going to create a company that really has a bunch of different ways in which we operate, and different brands are going to do different things based on how it is that best serves the market that they're serving? And those were the questions that were starting to happen as to, do we have to be all things to all people, Or can we really differentiate our strategies from both cost synergies as well as what are the cultures that each one of these organizations needs to be successful?
Just out of curiosity, did you deal with a situation where they actually flipped somehow, where well, now you all have to come in, or now, okay, everyone could be working virtually. Um,
Yeah, so
what are
I
you
think
seeing? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I see a lot of companies who had always been, you must, have yourself in a chair, and that's how we count you, that's how we manage you. And maybe some who were starting to try to do things a little bit different. Many of them are quickly going to let's do hybrid, and need to think about, well, what does that mean? How do we help people do that? Because there certainly are parts of different generations, different types of work that is more easily transition to hybrid than others. On the other hand, people have been doing this in many cases, not everybody, because I've worked with some companies that people had to be in the office every day, even though they were essential workers of different types, right? So we think about, that different, but I think it's much more now about what is the work, what is the culture we're trying to define, and what is the ultimate goal of bringing these organizations together. Are you really trying to combine and create one culture? And I think that those different decisions inform how much engagement you're going to have. And I think it is really important for organizations to be very clear on decision making, right? I mean, I think that's one of the most important things that happens. Who's going to make the decisions? When are they going to happen? What do we expect people to contribute to? And what do we expect that we've already made? And what do people expect that we've already made decisions on when we're asking for input, so that they actually trust what it is that we're
Yeah.
asking, and we're doing it in the right way? Because I will say, in the experiences that I've had and the way that I like to lead these types of efforts, is there is a fair amount of engagement, but we're very, very clear on, don't ask anybody something that we either don't care about or we're not going to be able to respond to, because that really erodes the trust. Also, be really clear about the roles and what levels of the organization are going to have responsibility for what pieces of either the influence of the decision or contributing to what we think. So space is a really good example of that, because there were several times during everybody, at least in the areas, a couple that I have been working over this time, have been in places that were more or less, closed down, with, certain people coming in and out. And so we did want to get a sense. And there are people who are in New York, or people who are in Washington, D.C., or people who are in Seattle, people in the San Francisco specifically. They either moved away and were not even in those areas while this was going on, and were working someplace else, or we're there and we're like, we are not getting on metro, we are not getting on public transportation, we're not interested in this until we have a better understanding of what's going to happen. And especially then, when you think about what was going on in this summer in the cities, last summer, that added additional complexity. And people were asking a lot of questions. So not only last year were we dealing with, a shutdown, but we're also dealing with some social questions that I think people were asking about engagement. I mean, there was a lot of real interest from leadership on who are we going to be going forward. And again, that empathy, that reflection, that thinking about, what is the culture we're trying to create, provided the opportunity for specific questions. And again, at the right levels.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Can you give us an example of a company that you work with, and what they struggled with, and what they actually decided was the culture they were going to come up with?
Yeah, I think that's great. So I worked with a couple of government contractors who, in general, think that they're pretty much the same, or very mission driven, right? Mission driven is what you hear. I'm like, well, okay, so what does mission driven mean? It's not just do what your customer wants. It's mission driven. You want to serve, and so some people, it's, we're the war fighter, or we're helping the health, we're helping provide specifically for, the healthcare community. So in two examples, I can say, we were like, so what does that mean to really service that group? And you've got technology people, you have researchers, you have, service providers, you have policy people, you have all of these different types of employees who do very different pieces of work to support those types of businesses and support those missions of the government that are so important. So what is it? And so in many cases, the example came down to the acquirer. I will say, for the most part, I work with strategic acquirers or private equity firms who are pretty clear on what that platform is that they're building. So there's not a lot of shaping, but it's what do we want to make sure that we don't lose in the process of the values that we've said? How are we making sure that if we think that we bought a company that has shared values, everybody seems to think that they do because they looked at the piece of paper and they say the same words. So what is the exercise that we go through? And so we actually do spend time going through what do the words mean. When you say this word is your value, and we find frequently things like trust, things like respect, they have different value. They mean slightly different things, or the behaviors are different. Accountability is specifically one. And I would say accountability is the one that I've heard, especially over the last year, people getting really clear on what they mean by that. And also something that's not in your value statements, but something that is was very important is the pace at which people are going to work, especially when you are bringing smaller companies into larger companies, really rationalizing, how are you going to do the things that you need to do to keep that small company successful at the pace it needs to go, at the technological advancements it needs to do, while you're bringing it into what they feel is a behemoth of an organization.
Oh, yeah.
Could you give us an example of a company that you brought together, and what were the issues on going faster versus going slower, and how it impacted the people on the ground?
Yeah. So specifically, there was a lot of, a $500 million large, very respected organization that had been in business for a long time, and it had very specific ways in which it did things. And it acquired 3 different companies of very different sizes. One significant of over $100 million, and another two smaller ones, who were all very used to moving fast, saying, apologizing and moving on. They didn't have their systems were good, but they certainly weren't as rigorous and didn't look at risk in the same way as the other company did.
Right.
And so there were a lot of questions around who gets to make decisions. So I would say the distribution of decision making and the dollar amount of decision making, and even just the can I decide to buy something, for my team, were kinds of questions that came up frequently in the consolidation of that, especially in 2 of the acquisitions had a lot of international activity. And so there was bringing a lot of risk into the organization, especially during the time we're talking about, that made people nervous. And the company that's being acquired was very concerned about, we just need to be able to get out there and go. And so we finally came up with a set of rules and a structure and protocols that worked for both sides. But it was painful.
How did it? Yeah. How did that? Were people brought into a room?
Yeah. So no.
Yeah. Yes and no. Love it. Right.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, there were because a lot of these things were happening on the ground where an issue would happen. It would get elevated to a leader. Many people worked. Like I said, it's very small organizations, people wise. And so things would happen and it would get reported. And then at the integration meetings, these types of issues would surface. And we would then determine who is going to be the right person to functionally take those and make some decisions around them.
See.
And then get that back out. So we had a very disciplined approach for how issues would be raised, how they would be handled, but always with a lens towards making sure that people weren't just told, oh, we're not going to do it this way,
Okay.
but an understanding of why something might need to be thought about differently than just do it the old way.
So it sounded, well, I heard two things. I heard integration meeting.
Yes.
So evidently I would imagine there's several of these going on, right? For different systems that are.
Right. So there
Right.
was an overall integration strategy that had many different players. And in fact, typically the way that works is you've got a key player from each of the strategic work streams of the company, one from each side of the acquisition, who is participating and representing the mindsets of the two companies and are managing those risks across the board.
Mm-hmm. And then it sounds like, and you keep repeating this, so I see that it, and I'm repeating it because I see it having a big role also when you look at there's no acquisition or anything, just a company trying to implement virtual and hybrid,
Right.
almost needing the same kinds of things, an integration meeting. But what you keep stressing is the ownership of the decision making.
Right.
Seems to be so crucial. Then the kind still have inclusion in that, but who do we go to for that? Seems to be a very important piece that people need.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the very first things that I start to think about when you put in place a governance structure of any type is, whether you're going to go so detailed as to put a RACI diagram in place, which identifies exactly what the roles are. My experience says that role clarity is the most important thing, in any type of change activity, because you're going through a process where people are doing something, they're stopping doing what they were doing, and they're having to start doing something else
Right.
while they're still doing whatever they were doing, right? So there's a change happening on top of these other things that are happening, and it's just really important, I think, to think about that. And I think it's important for that governance structure to have a shared vision of the CEO, to really understand. I mean, that's the one job of the CEO, is to say, here's where we're going, and this is why we bought this thing. And then the organization works to make sure that it is shared and that the language is created to adopt that going forward. And then there's a decision structure that says, what are the decisions that are up for grabs for the people in the organization? What are the things that we've already decided, and where do we want your help? And I think, in the ones that we did over the last year, the big challenge was being really clear. We need to take some time to understand what is happening and what's the goodness of the acquisition that we don't want to lose. And we need to do this in a different way than we might have done it before, especially if we're talking about something that's going to be market changing. So being able to create teams and using tools, and specifically, collaboration tools and, document sharing tools that people can feel comfortable, really talking about things that are important to the people they don't know.
And almost, it can become this perfect storm. Hey, virtual, hybrid, 2 new leaders, 1 new leader, these new teams. And by the way, on top of that, there's mergers and acquisitions. That it actually can come together in an elegant way to build off of the synergy, the leverage off of this. Hey, and we're also going hybrid, and this is, I just sort of think it's that implementing those tools becomes a very energetic discussion now. But wait a minute, I'm home now, or I am going to become into an office, but it's a totally different office, etc. One last question around how you mentioned, well, 2 things. You mentioned coming up with a common language. So how do you socialize that? I mean, how does everyone in this organization start working around the common language? And then 2, you said something as you take it down, when Mitch raised the question, you take it down to everyday work. People are asking a lot more questions about, but what did this mean for me? what's the engagement? You said you're finding more of that now, and we're finding that's a trend around the voice of the people. What can you share around those last two themes?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the voice of the people because I think that is so important. And I know that, one of the things that I've always found helpful is to take a pulse and not something that is so complicated that it takes a lot of time. And again, not something that's going to stir up additional questions or concerns, but a simple way to get a sense of how people are feeling, what's on their mind, what is keeping them from paying attention to the work they should be doing, and what is, and what else could be done to make the transition easy for them. And really 3 to 5 questions, and do that every 6 to 8 weeks, is really important to help. And that you can do that for whatever kind of transition. But specifically, I think with mergers and acquisitions, it's really important. And be testing people along the way. Do you know what your role is in this new environment?
Yep. Excellent. Well, I really was looking forward to this, especially that piece where I see it's sort of all coming together in a perfect storm, needing to borrow some of this new energy that's happening because of the new cultures, and to something that we keep doing. We're doing strategy, we're doing mergers, we're doing acquisitions. How might that all come together? And you brought that to life for us. So how can people get in touch with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn at Kim Clark Pakstys, or you can find me at kimclarkpakstys.com. And that's KIMCLARKPAKSTYS.com.
Fabulous. And we, of course, will be posting all of this, as our listeners know, so they can see that right on the screen, listen a little from tidbits from this, and also go to the accompanying article that will be attached to your podcasts. Mitch.
Well, thank you, Kim, and thank you, Ginny.
Thank you.
And this has been a delightful conversation to understand how to integrate two companies through mergers and acquisitions, with some great additional tools on how to do it when you're not even integrating or merging and acquiring. So we learned a lot today. So thank you to Kim. Thank you to Ginny. Again, thank you to our listeners. If you've loved this podcast, please share it out with your friends and colleagues. And we'll see you next week on the next episode of Team Anywhere.